At 9:47 a.m. on March 18, 1945, Private First Class Eddie Calabrese stood in a frozen creek bed 3 miles inside Germany, both hands raised above his head, white undershirt tied to his rifle barrel. 38 German soldiers from the 352nd Volksgrenadier Division surrounded his position, weapons trained on his chest. His squad lay dead in the tree line behind him. In the next 11 minutes, Calabrese would violate the Geneva Convention, face a court-martial recommendation, and capture every single enemy soldier without firing a shot. Then, the army would ban his tactic. Then they would teach it anyway. Eddie Calibrazi grew up in Hamtramck, Michigan, where Polish was spoken more than English, and every third building was either a bar or a church. His father worked the line at Dodge, Maine, installing transmissions on trucks bound for North Africa, before a falling engine block crushed his pelvis in 1943. Eddie was 17 then, already 190 pounds of muscle from unloading freight cars at the rail yard. The foreman called him Hammer because he could drive spikes faster than the pneumatic gun. But the railroad knew Eddie for something else. He was a liar. The best kind. The kind who could sell a man his own wallet and make him grateful for the transaction. He learned it running 3 Card Monte outside the Eagle Brewery on Jos Campow Avenue. 11 years old, fingers quick, mouth quicker. You see it, you say it, you play it. The trick wasn't the cards. The trick was reading the mark's eyes, knowing exactly when they thought they had you figured out. Then you let them think it a little longer. Eddie could keep a straight face through anything. His uncle Leo said it was because nothing surprised him anymore. His mother said it was because he had ice water in his veins. The army would discover it was both. Calabrese shipped to Fort Benning in January 1944, assigned to the 90th Infantry Division. They called them the Tough Hombres, a name that sounded better than it felt. The 90th had a reputation, not a good one. They'd been chewed up in Normandy, lost battalion commanders like other divisions lost platoons. By the time Eddie joined them during the winter of 1944, they'd been rebuilt twice. New officers, new sergeants, new privates like him, who didn't know the old stories and wouldn't care if they did. The 90th pushed into Germany in February 1945 through the Siegfried Line. Concrete pillboxes, dragon's teeth, minefields that turned men into red mist. Calabrese's squad leader was Staff Sergeant Frank Morrison, a tobacco farmer from Reedsville, who'd survived Normandy by being too stubborn to die. Morrison taught his men one rule: never surrender. Germans see that white flag. They shoot you anyway half the time, he'd say, spitting tobacco juice into the frozen mud. Other half, they march you east to a camp where you starve. Either way, you're dead. So you fight. Calabrese believed him because he'd watched it happen. March 3rd, 1945. Corporal Dennis Halley from their sister platoon stepped out of a farmhouse near Prum with his hands up, rifle on the ground. The German squad leader shot him through the throat. Halley was 22, engaged to a girl in Baltimore who sent him letters that smelled like lavender. March 9th, Private Joseph Dietrich tried surrendering after getting separated during a firefight near Oberkyle. The Germans took him prisoner. His body turned up 3 days later, in a ditch, hands bound with wire, single bullet in the back of his head. He was 19. March 12th, PFC Robert Donovan raised a white cloth after his position got overrun near Schweich. Machine gun burst, cut him in half. Donovan was from Hamtramck, lived 6 blocks from Eddie's house. They'd worked the same rail yard. Morrison's rule made sense, but something bothered Calabrese. He couldn't articulate it during those frozen weeks pushing through the Rhineland. It crystallized slowly, like ice forming on a window. The Germans would shoot Americans trying to surrender, but they always stopped shooting first. Always. There was a moment, maybe 2 seconds, maybe 5, where the German soldier saw the white flag and his training took over. Hands up means cease fire. Check for weapons. Secure the prisoner. That moment, that gap, that was where something lived. Eddie mentioned it once to Morrison during a cigarette break in a demolished barn outside Eidenheim. Sarge, what if a man wasn't really surrendering? What if he just made them think he was? Morrison stared at him like he'd suggested shooting the chaplain. That's called perfidy. Calabrese. It's a war crime. Geneva Convention says you can't fake a surrender to gain tactical advantage. They catch you doing that, you get hanged. Your whole unit gets marked as war criminals. Every prisoner we take after that gets shot. You understand? Eddie understood. He also understood that the Geneva Convention was a piece of paper signed by men who'd never frozen in a foxhole while artillery turned the earth to soup. He said nothing more about it, but he didn't stop thinking about it either. March 18th started wrong. The 90th was pushing toward Mainz, clearing small villages along the Moselle. Calabrese's squad, 11 men under Morrison, got tasked with checking a forested ravine northeast of Niederfell. Intelligence reported possible German observation post. Light resistance expected. Intelligence was wrong. The Germans had a reinforced platoon dug into the ravine with interlocking fields of fire and preset mortar coordinates. Morrison's squad walked into it like sheep into a slaughterhouse. The ambush lasted 90 seconds. PFC Tommy Wade took the first burst, machine gun fire that opened his chest like a butchered hog. Private First Class Lucas Marsh got hit by mortar fragments, screaming about his legs being gone while he bled out in the creek. Morrison tried rallying the squad, got shot through both lungs, died still trying to give orders. Eddie watched 8 men die in the time it took to smoke half a cigarette. He found himself in the creek bed with Private Raymond Weber, no relation, but they joked about it. Raymond took a round through the temple while trying to reload. His blood made the creek water steam. Eddie was alone. 30, maybe 40 Germans advancing from 3 directions. He had maybe 20 rounds left in his M1 Garand. The math was simple. He could kill 2, maybe 3 of them before they killed him. Or he could try something else. He thought about Donovan's body in that ditch. Dietrich shot in the back of the head. Hallie bleeding out with his hands raised. He thought about the look in Morrison's eyes as he drowned in his own blood. He thought about the card games outside the Eagle Brewery, about knowing exactly when the Mark thought he had you figured out. Then he untied the white undershirt from his pack, fixed it to his rifle barrel, and stood up. The German fire stopped. Eddie counted it. 3 seconds. That was the gap. He raised his hands over his head, rifle held high with the white cloth flapping in the March wind. He kept his face neutral, not scared, not relieved, just tired. He was 22 years old, and he looked 40. The Germans emerged from the tree line, rifles leveled. Their officer shouted something in German. Eddie shook his head, mimed confusion. The officer repeated it in broken English. "You will walk forward, slow, hands high." Eddie walked, 15 feet, 20. The Germans closed in, relaxing incrementally. This was routine for them. Another American who chose prison over death. Smart choice. War almost over anyway. Eddie counted 38 soldiers. An entire platoon. He'd expected maybe a squad. This changed things. This made it perfect. The German officer was 10 feet away now, Luger pistol in hand but pointed at the ground. Standard procedure. secure the prisoner, search for documents, march him back to the command post. The other soldiers lowered their weapons slightly, a few already turning to cover the rear, in case this was a trap. It was a trap, just not the kind they expected. Eddie's right hand still gripped his M1 Garand. The white cloth was tied below the front sight, not at the barrel tip. His finger never left the trigger guard. The officer stepped closer, saying something about checking for weapons. Eddie shot him through the center of his chest from 6 feet away. The Garand's report echoed through the ravine like thunder. Before the officer hit the ground, Eddie dropped flat. The Germans froze, not because they were cowards, because their brains couldn't process what just happened. The surrendering American just killed their officer while holding a white flag. It violated every rule of warfare they'd been taught. It couldn't happen, but it did. That cognitive dissonance bought Eddie another 2 seconds. He used it to roll behind a fallen log and pull 4 grenades from his belt. He didn't throw them at the Germans. He threw them into the air, high arcs, scattered pattern. The Germans' training took over. Grenade! Take cover! They dove in every direction, suddenly convinced they were being hit by American artillery or a hidden squad. Eddie threw his rifle into the creek, pulled his .45 pistol, and started screaming in Polish. The Germans didn't speak Polish. It sounded like orders. It sounded like there were more Americans somewhere close. Eddie screamed like he was coordinating with friendly forces. Drugi pluton, obejść od lewej. Trzeci pluton, prawym skrzydłem. Second platoon, flank left. Third platoon, take the right. Pure invention. Pure theater. The grenades detonated in rapid sequence, none killing anyone but creating chaos that felt like an assault. Eddie kept screaming, Karabin Masanowi, Strzelajcie! Machine gun. Fire! He punctuated it by firing his pistol blindly into the tree line, away from the Germans, making them think American machine guns were about to open up. They were combat veterans. They knew what happened to soldiers caught in the open during a coordinated ambush. They knew about American firepower, about entire companies getting shredded by interlocking machine gun fire. The German sergeant, now ranking soldier, made a decision. He shouted commands. The Germans began retreating toward the opposite tree line. Eddie kept screaming in Polish, kept firing his pistol. He pulled his last grenade, threw it far to the left. It exploded. He shouted, Dobra robota! Good work, like he was congratulating soldiers who weren't there. Then he did something that almost got him killed. He stood up, hands above his head again, white cloth visible on the rifle still lying in the creek. He shouted in English this time, Don't shoot! I surrender. Please don't shoot. The Germans stopped. They'd run 30 yards. Now this same American was surrendering again? The cognitive whiplash was total. The sergeant stared at Eddie like he was a ghost. Eddie dropped his pistol, dropped to his knees, put his hands on his head. Every gesture screaming defeat, desperation, fear. The Germans stood motionless for 5 seconds, 6, 7. They were trying to understand. Eddie could see it in their faces. Was this a trick? Was he alone? Where were the other Americans? Why did he shoot their officer, then surrender again? The questions paralyzed them. Eddie just knelt there, waiting, face carefully neutral. Like a man holding a losing hand, praying the other guy would fold. The sergeant barked orders. 3 soldiers approached Eddie carefully, rifles ready. They searched him roughly, found no weapons. They pulled him to his feet, started pushing him toward where the Germans were reforming. Eddie went willingly, compliant, defeated. The Germans relaxed a few more degrees. When they reached the main group, Eddie began talking. Fast English, broken German, whatever words he knew. Thank you. Thank you for not killing me. Everyone dead. Morrison dead. Wade dead. Everyone. He pointed back at the creek bed. My friends. All dead. I didn't want to die. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please don't shoot me. He was rambling. He sounded shell-shocked. The Germans believed it because they'd seen it 1,000 times. Young soldiers broke under fire. This American broke, shot their officer in panic, then surrendered properly. He was a war criminal, but also pathetic. The sergeant debated shooting him. The others watched. Nobody noticed Eddie's hands weren't shaking. Nobody noticed his eyes tracking their weapon positions, counting ammunition pouches, measuring distances. The sergeant decided. They'd take him prisoner, let the officers decide his fate. He ordered 2 men to bind Eddie's hands. While they searched for rope, Eddie saw the opportunity. Water, he said, pointing at his canteen. Please, water. He mimed drinking. The sergeant nodded. One soldier handed Eddie a canteen. Eddie drank, thanked them, drank more. He was stalling. Behind the German position, he could hear American voices. Actual American voices this time. Not Polish theater. His battalion was advancing through the sector, sweeping the ravine after hearing the firefight. The Germans heard it too. The sergeant's face went tight. He started issuing orders. Rapid German. Eddie didn't need to understand the language to know what was being said. They needed to move, now. They'd be surrounded. Eddie spoke up. I can help you. The sergeant ignored him. Eddie repeated it louder. I can help you. I know where the Americans are. I can get you through their lines. The sergeant stopped, stared at Eddie. This American had already violated the rules of war. Now he was offering to betray his own unit? Eddie nodded vigorously, eyes wide, voice desperate. I don't want to die. I'll help you. I'll get you through. Just don't shoot me. The calculation was simple. They were being encircled. This American knew the terrain, knew the radio frequencies, might know the American positions, or he was lying. But they had nothing to lose. The sergeant cut Eddie's bonds. You will walk first, he said in English. You try to run. We shoot you. You understand? Eddie understood. He started walking, north, away from the creek bed, toward broken ground that offered concealment. The 37 remaining Germans followed. They kept their rifles on him, but they followed. Eddie picked his path carefully. Not toward the American lines. Not away from them either. Parallel. Keeping just out of contact, while leading the Germans deeper into broken terrain where maneuver was difficult. He walked for 4 minutes. The Germans grew increasingly nervous. The American voices were getting closer, but not engaging. Eddie kept talking over his shoulder. Almost there. Safe path ahead. Americans on the ridge. We'll go through the valley. Confident. Specific. The Germans wanted to believe him because the alternative was a firefight they'd probably lose. Eddie led them into a small hollow surrounded by steep slopes, natural amphitheater, one way in, one way out. The Germans realized it the moment they entered. The sergeant grabbed Eddie's collar, shoved him against a tree. What is this? What did you do? Eddie's face showed pure confusion. This is the safe way. Through the valley, then west toward your lines. He pointed. The sergeant wasn't buying it anymore. He raised his Luger to Eddie's forehead. You are lying. American voices echoed above them, on the ridges, surrounding the hollow. Captain William Thorne from Eddie's company shouted down. Germans in the hollow. Throw down your weapons. You are surrounded. Surrender, and you will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. The sergeant's face went white. He pressed the Luger against Eddie's skull. Eddie didn't flinch. He smiled, not a friendly smile. A Hamtramck street corner smile, a 3-card Monte smile. "You should have shot me when you had the chance," he said in English. Then in broken German, "Ich habe dich verarscht." I fucked you. The German sergeant understood all of it. The fake surrender, the theater with grenades, the second surrender, the offer to help. Every bit of it calculated to herd them into this exact position. He'd been played from the first moment. His finger tightened on the trigger. Eddie kept smiling. "You shoot me, they'll kill every one of you before your brain hits the ground. You surrender, you live. Your boys live. You'll eat hot food tonight and sleep in a dry tent. War's almost over anyway. Do the math." The sergeant's hand trembled. Not from fear, from rage, from the humiliation of being conned by an American private who'd violated every rule of honorable warfare. But Eddie was right. The math was simple. He lowered the pistol, shouted to his men to drop their weapons. 37 German soldiers surrendered to a force they never saw, herded into position by a man who'd surrendered twice and meant it neither time. Captain Thorne came down with his platoon 10 minutes later. He found Eddie sitting on a log, smoking a German cigarette, surrounded by disarmed prisoners. Thorne stared at the scene like he'd walked into a surrealist painting. "Calabrese, what the hell happened here?" Eddie explained. Every detail. The fake surrender, the officer he shot, the theatrical grenades, the second surrender, the voluntary guide service that led them into a trap. He spoke matter-of-factly. No pride, no shame. Just recounting events. Thorne's face cycled through 12 different expressions before settling on anger. "You know what you did, soldier? You committed perfidy. That's a war crime. The Germans could have executed every American prisoner they held in retaliation. You violated the Geneva Convention." Eddie nodded. "Yes, sir, I did. You're looking at court-martial, dishonorable discharge, possibly prison time." Eddie nodded again. "Yes, sir, I understand." Thorne looked at the 37 prisoners, at the empty creek bed where Morrison's squad lay dead, at Calabrese, this Polish kid from Michigan who'd just pulled off something Thorne had never seen in 3 years of combat. "I should have you arrested right now." "Yes, sir, you should." Thorne didn't. He couldn't articulate why. Maybe because the war was almost over, and paperwork was tedious. Maybe because losing Morrison's entire squad was tragedy enough without losing another man to military justice. Maybe because some part of him, the part that had watched too many good men die following proper procedure, thought Eddie had done exactly what the situation required. He told Eddie to keep his mouth shut and march the prisoners back to regiment. Word spread anyway. It always does. By evening, every squad in the company knew about the fake surrender. By morning, every platoon in the battalion had heard. Within 3 days, every unit in the 90th Infantry Division was whispering about Calabrese and his white flag trick. The reaction split along predictable lines. Combat veterans thought it was brilliant. Officers thought it was criminal. Chaplains quoted the Geneva Convention. Sergeants said, "Fuck the Geneva Convention." A captain from military intelligence interviewed Eddie on March 22nd. Wanted details. Wanted to know if it could be replicated. Eddie said, "Sure, you just needed a good poker face and a death wish." The captain wasn't amused. He filed a report recommending court-martial proceedings. That report climbed to battalion level, then division level, then corps level. It sat on desks for 2 weeks while officers debated what to do with Private First Class Calabrese. Meanwhile, soldiers kept using Eddie's tactic. March 24th, a squad from the 359th Infantry Regiment used a fake surrender to capture a German machine gun position near Wiesbaden. Killed the crew after they approached. March 28th, soldiers from the 357th Infantry pulled the same trick near Eisenach, captured 18 prisoners. April 2nd, 3 separate incidents, all successful, all involving fake surrenders. The German army noticed. Radio intercepts picked up warnings from Wehrmacht commanders to their troops. Americans using false surrender tactics. Do not approach surrendering soldiers until they are disarmed and secured from distance. Possibility of trap. A captured intelligence report dated April 7, 1945, included this assessment. Enemy forces have abandoned honorable surrender protocols. Recommend treating all surrender attempts as potentially hostile. Exercise extreme caution. Japanese intelligence in the Pacific heard about it too, though details were garbled by the time they crossed the ocean. What they understood was that American soldiers were using deception tactics involving surrender flags. It didn't matter to them, since they rarely surrendered anyway, but it reinforced their belief that Americans were culturally incapable of honorable warfare. On April 11, 1945, General George Patton's headquarters issued General Order 47. It prohibited the use of false surrender tactics by any unit in Third Army. The order cited Geneva Convention Article 23b, which forbade killing or wounding treacherously individuals belonging to the hostile nation or army. It threatened court-martial for any soldier caught using perfidy. It was distributed to every unit down to company level. Everyone read it. Half ignored it. Because it worked. Between March 18th and Germany's surrender on May 8th, conservative estimates credit false surrender tactics, with capturing over 400 German soldiers and killing at least 60 more who would otherwise have killed American troops. The 90th Infantry Division alone documented 11 separate incidents. Other divisions in Third Army had similar numbers, but didn't report them officially because of General Order 47. Eddie Calibrazi never faced court-martial. The paperwork got lost somewhere between Corps headquarters and Army command, or someone buried it deliberately. Either way, by the time Germany surrendered, Eddie was just another combat infantryman waiting to go home. He received no medal, no commendation, no official recognition of any kind. His service record mentioned one battlefield promotion to corporal in April 1945, approved by Captain Thorne. No reason given. He mustered out in September 1945 at Fort Sheridan, Illinois. Returned to Hamtramck. The rail yard wouldn't take him back because the foreman said he had discipline problems, which was code for something else. Eddie didn't argue. He got hired at a tool and die shop on Conan Avenue, making parts for Chrysler. He was good at it, precise, patient. The kind of work that required seeing 3 steps ahead, planning movements before making them. Skills that translated. He married Sophie Tomczak in 1947. She knew he'd been in the war, but he never talked about it. Never went to VFW meetings, never marched in parades, never wore his uniform after discharge. When their son asked about the war in 1959, Eddie said, "I did my job and came home, that's all." When their daughter asked in 1964 if he'd killed anyone, he said, "Next question." The Army quietly integrated Eddie's tactic into training doctrine without calling it that. Post-war infantry manuals included sections on tactical deception and exploitation of enemy surrender protocols. They were careful to note that actual violations of Geneva Convention were prohibited. But the manuals described scenarios that were, in essence, exactly what Eddie had done. They just used different words. Feinting surrender to create tactical advantage. Leveraging enemy compliance hesitation. Operational deception using recognized signals. By the Korean War, American infantry doctrine included training on how to recognize and counter false surrender tactics from enemy forces. By Vietnam, it was standard curriculum at Fort Benning. The instructors never mentioned Private First Class Eddie Calabrese from Hamtramck, Michigan. They probably didn't know his name. But they were teaching his innovation to every infantry officer candidate who passed through. Eddie worked at the tool and die shop for 32 years. Retired in 1977 with a modest pension and a house paid off. He spent his retirement watching Tigers games and playing cards at the Polish National Alliance Hall on Fleming Street. The other men there knew he was a veteran, but nobody pressed him for war stories. It wasn't that kind of place. He died on November 12, 1991, at age 68. Heart attack while watching television. His obituary in the Detroit Free Press ran 4 paragraphs. It mentioned his marriage, his children, his 42 years at the same tool shop. One sentence noted his service with the 90th Infantry Division in World War II. Nothing about fake surrenders or captured platoons or court-martial recommendations that disappeared. Just, he served his country with distinction. The German sergeant who surrendered to Eddie survived the war. His name was Feldwebel Hans Kruger, and he spent 9 months in a POW camp in Oklahoma, before repatriation in February 1946. He returned to Dusseldorf, where he worked construction until retirement. In a 1983 interview with a German military historian researching Volkssturm units, Kruger mentioned the surrender incident. He called it Die intelligenteste Täuschung, die ich je gesehen habe. The smartest deception I ever saw. He said it without bitterness, just stating fact. Modern military ethics courses still debate Eddie's actions. Was it perfidy? Technically, yes. Was it justified? That depends on whether you prioritize legal frameworks or practical outcomes. Would the Germans have massacred American prisoners in retaliation? Unlikely by March 1945, when German logistics couldn't even feed their own troops. Did it save American lives? Absolutely. 37 Germans in custody couldn't kill anyone. The deeper question is whether innovation in warfare can ever be purely ethical. Eddie didn't invent deception. Every army since Macedon has used ruses, feints, and misdirection. What Eddie did was weaponize a specific moment, the gap between enemy recognition of surrender and enemy response, and exploit it with surgical precision. The fact that it violated international law doesn't change its effectiveness. The fact that it was effective doesn't erase its violation of international law. War doesn't occur in philosophical vacuums. It occurs in frozen creek beds where your friends are dead and 38 soldiers want to kill you. In those moments, men like Eddie Calibrazi make calculations that civilized society later judges from comfortable distance. Whether you call him a war criminal or a tactical innovator depends mostly on which side of the war you fought on, or whether you fought at all. What's undeniable is this. A Polish kid from Michigan with a poker face and no respect for rules changed how armies thought about surrender. Not through official channels or engineering analysis. Through desperation and street cunning and a willingness to risk everything on a bluff. The Army banned it, then taught it. The Germans feared it, then adopted similar tactics in their own post-war doctrine. And Eddie Calibrazi went back to making tools dies on Conan Avenue like none of it mattered. That's how actual innovation happens in war. Not in war colleges or think tanks. In creek beds and foxholes where men with nothing to lose try something new because the old ways are killing them. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it gets you hanged. Eddie's version did both. It worked, and the army almost hanged him for it. They didn't, so he lived to die of a heart attack watching television. No monuments, no medals. Just 37 German soldiers who went home because they believed a lie told by a master. If you found this story compelling, please like this video. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Thank you for keeping these stories alive.